Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome to Culture Night.
Where each week we drink fancy wine and watch movies that are in some way culturally significant. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sarah, and we are back for Season 2, Episode 2 of Culture Night Pod. And thank you to anybody that's tuning in and listening, whether this is your first time here or you're coming back. We appreciate all of you. And now we, I guess, don't really have any podcast business.
We can give a thank you to someone who has already given us a recommendation or a couple recommendations.
Yes. All right. We so last week on the pod, we asked for any recommendations for anybody that really loves the film noir genre, since that is our focus for season 2. And we got a response from James Fergan on Twitter, and he loves that we're doing the film noir theme. So thank you for enjoying our choice. And he recommended The Big Heat, Kiss Me Deadly, Double Indemnity, Where the Sidewalk Ends, The Maltese Falcon, Laura, The Big Combo, and Sunset Boulevard.
That's a lot. I don't know if we'll have that many this season, but depending on how it goes.
We might have to do a film noir round 2. Yeah. But spoiler alert, one of those is on our list tonight. So
thank you for the recommendation, James.
Yes, we appreciate you. Thank you.
This week, we are drinking the 2014 Tobin James Fat Boys Infidel. Let's give it a sniff.
It has a very pungent alcohol first sniff.
Get like a bit of like plum, like prune almost on the nose.
It has like, it's kind of punch you in the face with alcohol, but then it has like a real very fruity, dark fruity
when I
sweetness
poured it,
behind
it smelled more alcohol forward, but it seems like a little bit of aeration is going to help. So let's give it a taste.
It's almost like a sour sweetness though. It's like very good on the undernotes. Like it is very alcohol-y on the first taste, but that underlying note is like this sour
like
sweet
dryness. I don't know if it's just like really tannic, just really dry on the tongue there. I thought I tasted some berry at first, but I'll have to give it a second taste.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's not like raspberry sweet or those like brighter summery fruits that I think of, but it's like a very like warm, wintry, dark fruitness.
Yeah, like the I don't think of plum really as being a winter fruit, but I feel like that kind of.
I mean, I don't really think of a lot of fruits as being winter fruits, but
yeah,
I don't know. There's something good underlying that's very, very good to it.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
We will dig into this a little more as the episode goes on.
So we don't have a behind the screens segment this week. Been kind of a wild week, didn't prepare anything, but we'll get back to that next week.
We can kind of combine our deep dive and the behind the screens into one if we really want to play the sound effect.
Yeah, I like hearing it. So.
All right, so for this week, going behind the big screens of Hollywood and learning some more about some aspect of film production or storytelling, I did a little deep dive. This kind of goes back to last week on just the film noir genre. And there is a lot to be learned about the film noir genre. So instead of going really deep and talking today, I'm just doing a little intro and have kind of a little challenge almost for us as we move forward on these. And then we'll dive into different aspects of this as we move forward with each episode of this season.
Love it.
So to start off with, according to Wikipedia, film noir is a cinematic term used primarily to describe stylish Hollywood crime dramas, particularly those that emphasize cynical attitudes and motivations.
Interesting.
Has that how you would describe it?
No, I would just think black and white crime drama, but
I mean, what I take
then again,
is
all movies were black and white then.
True.
So
stylish Hollywood crime drama, I think, is a good fit for it. So that's like their definition of it to start with. And this genre was in its prime time during the 40s and 50s, which is also, last week was in the movie was from 1940. So
right there.
Fit right in there. And then the term film noir is French, literally French for black film, but the closer, more interpretive meaning that people attribute it to is a dark film.
I was going to say dark makes much more sense.
Dark undertones. And so I started reading some more, and there is a lot more information that I have to share about this, but I will save that for next week. But on my quick internet search, I came across a list from Todd on the blog, The Cinema Monolith.
Ooh,
and
Todd. All right.
These are his 10 things that he thinks makes up a film noir movie. So I figured I will read them. And then since we're kind of about to go into our slept on it for Stranger on the Third Floor, we can go back through and check off. And then every week we can give them a score, a film noir score out of 10 of whether or not they meet these 10 things.
How noir are thou?
It gets worse the more
I was trying to come up with a cool segment name. Sorry.
No, I liked where you were going. We'll workshop it a little bit. So, according to his...
How noir you are. Sorry. Stop.
We will workshop it in the coming 7 days
and
come up with a better title. But I'll just read the list. So these are Todd from the Cinema Monolith's 10 things that make a film noir movie. Number 1, made in the classic noir period, which he considers to be from 1940 to 1958. Black and white, short and square, meaning that it is under 100 minutes and it is shot in the square aspect ratio. Point number 4 is that it's made and set in the U.S. And 5 is crime, murder, and guns. So there's some element of one or all of those things. Point 6 is double crosses, flashbacks, and voiceover narration. Point 7 is dangerous babes, some kind of femme fatale, alluring female that wants to bring the innocent male down. Riding the rails, there's some kind of element of train riding, metros, subways, that stuff. And 2 more. Point 9 is from dusk till dawn. The majority of the film takes place in the night hours, in the dark. And point 10 is it ends on a sour note. So it's not a whole happy, everybody ends up where they need to be. There's something that kind of is like a last minute plot twist. So I will go through them again, or do we want to...
Now I'm going to be looking for a plot twist each time.
Sorry, I don't know if that'll spoil this for you.
No plot twist.
I don't know if you want me to go through them again now and we can rate Stranger on the Third Floor, if you want to wait till we like really go into Slept on It, or...
I mean, I feel like we're going to Slept on It now, right?
All right, yeah. So I'll read them again and we'll think back to last week.
Quick.
So made in the classic noir period, 1940, 1958.
1940.
Black and white?
Yep.
Yes. Short and square? Yes.
I don't remember it being square. It might have been. It might have just been modified, the version we were watching.
Yeah. It was definitely short, being only an hour long.
Love it.
We'll give it a point. Made and set in the U.S., took place in New York City. Crime, murder, and guns.
I don't know if there was guns.
There was definitely crime and murder. Double crosses, flashbacks, and voiceover narration.
Flashback and voiceover.
Yeah. And dangerous babe, there was not... I mean, Jane was just a character. She was not
in danger in the end when she went to try to...
She was in danger.
With this guy she thought was the killer.
She was not a bad guy, though. Riding the rails, there were no trains that I remember. From dawn till dusk, but besides the courtroom scene. Yes, I'm sorry. Dusk till dawn. Yeah. Sorry. The courtroom stuff was during the day, but
most of the whole rest of the movie took place that one night where he, was going kind of crazy.
Yeah, he had his nightmare that took the whole night, and then ends on a sour note. I feel like this all kind of wrapped up well. So Stranger on the Third Floor gets a 6 out of 10 on the noir list, but it was the first one, so it's just starting to, or is according. I think it might be controversial whether or not it's the first one, but it's starting to lay the groundwork for what a noir film is. So we will be looking out for those things.
That concludes our How Noir Are Yar. How Noir Yar.
If you can't say it, it can't be the title.
How Noir Yar.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
Yes.
So does your rating change after sleeping on it? I gave it a 4.8 and you gave it a 5.3.
Not really, because I feel like I need to see more of these before I can really change my score. I mean, I think on first thought, maybe I'd bump it down to like an even 5 or maybe just under 5, but I think that might change in like 2 or 3 weeks once I've seen more film noir movies.
See, I was going to bump it up 0.1 to a 4.9 just because I can kind of see how it could become like a cult classic type thing where it's like, not that it was bad, but like one of those like so bad it's good, especially the acting.
Yeah.
I don't know how much like the whole nightmare sequence took forever. But I could see, based on where I tuned in, if I was watching it, I might kind of watch the rest of it. So I'll give it another 0.1. But
I appreciate.
That's not all I'm willing to give it.
Yeah, I appreciate the thought you put into that. Yeah, I'm just still holding out for any other getting more information. I feel like I don't really have enough information to give a good score on that one. Do you have any other thoughts or anything after watching last week?
I think that's it. I'm excited to turn the page and go into tonight's movie.
So what are we watching tonight?
We are watching The Maltese Falcon from 1941. The movie is not rated, given that it predates rating. Not that it's unrated or anything or crazy like that. The top 3 movies released that year were Sergeant York, with that grossed $16 million. Gone with the Wind, which says 1939, but it must have grossed or still been running and grossing more money. That grossed to $12.2 million, and Suspicion that grossed $4.5 million.
And again, just a disclaimer for anybody that missed last week's episode, it is obviously hard to find specific stats and data from the early 1940s. And especially, I don't know whether these websites are modifying for inflation or where exactly they're getting all their numbers from, but this is just what.
Yeah, I don't know how reliable the numbers could possibly be, given that like everyone's paying in cash and they've got all these small town theaters, or
everyone's probably paying in coins, not even even cash.
So who knows? But the top 3 songs released that year were Chattanooga Choo Choo by Glenn Miller, Daddy by Sammy Kaye, and Stardust by Artie Shaw. Can't say I know any of those.
I can say that I'm not familiar with a single one of those.
Yeah, we'll have to give them a listen sometime and see if they're any good.
Yeah, so going back, this is one of the movies that James on Twitter recommended. So it was kind of on our radar. I'd seen it on a couple lists because, like I said last week, most of our information for this has been like Google top noir films and kind of just trying to pull from there. So this was one I'd seen a couple times, and it was not really at the top of our list, but
we were going to watch another movie tonight until we got the recommendation, and then we
made a quick pivot. So thank you.
Appreciate that.
Have you seen it before?
Absolutely not.
Nope.
And I know nothing about this movie, but part of me hopes that the Falcon is like a gang or some sort of some sort of crime boss name or something. If it's just about a bird, I'm not sure how excited I am.
Well, I will say for me, a Maltese is a little cute puppy. So that's all I can think of when I think about this. And
okay, never mind.
I really don't think any animals really have anything to do with
I don't
this.
know. There's like rappers nowadays now named like Lil Baby. So maybe it was kind of one of those things of like, I'm going to give a really cute name, but I'm actually
big and tough. Yeah, I really have nothing to expect. I feel like the title of this, last week, Stranger on the Third Floor. There's probably going to be some strange man on the 3rd floor of some building. Gives you a little bit of a place to go with this. This, I've got nothing. So kind of anxious to dive in and see what it brings.
Yeah, let's go.
Yes, the Maltese Falcon.
Sure. Cheers.
We never remember. Did I record? Yes, I did.
Yeah, got it this time. The Maltese Falcon. Yes. That was a wild ride.
Yeah. I mean, I'll skip ahead for just 1 second and then we'll go to wine. One of my notes literally just says, "What?" in all caps because
it just
not what I was expecting.
Felt like there were so many more layers to that movie than I expected.
Yeah.
Just kept going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's go with the wine rating, starting with the wine scale being a 0 to 10 scale. And all of these wines are weighted given the fact that they are all nice wines. So a low score does not necessarily mean the wine is bad. These are all very good wines. That being said, how would you rate this particular wine?
I'm going to give it a 6.1.
I think I'm going to give it like a 4.3.
That's what I thought when you opened it. And you asked me, is this wine gone bad? And I smelled it and it was a little pungent and it was
the cork also disintegrated, like didn't give me too much faith in there.
Yeah. But it caught me off guard. It surprised me. And it's just as lovely. Again, spoiler alert, this is day 2. If you're not watching on YouTube and you're just listening, you can't tell, but we were wearing different clothes. We finished this on a different day and I enjoy it just as much right now. Yeah.
I just, it's not something that I'm going to rave about or, it's not my favorite of them. It's still a good wine. Don't get me wrong. If someone pours me a glass, I'm not going to spit it out and pour it down the drain or something. But it didn't really do too much. It was very alcohol forward. It took a while for me to get to a point where I could really enjoy it. But does have a lot more body to it and some of those dark fruit earthiness, that we do like in the wine. So giving it a 4.3.
I understand that. I respect that. I still really liked it. All right. So movie rating out of 10.
I'm going to give it a 6.1.
Okay. I was going to give it a 5.8.
I just, I don't really see it as being too quotable. Rewatchable if I'm in the right mood. Possibly there's a lot going on. I feel like I would need a cup of coffee to rewatch it again.
For sure. And I think I'd like to I mean, not that I want to sit down and rewatch it right now, but there was so much going on that I think I would take a little bit more from it.
And like
from
we
a
were
second
very
pass.
focused on the movie, and I feel like I still missed a ton.
I had to Google plot summary just so I could make sure that I was following it. And I read 2 different ones between when we stopped watching last night and before we started watching again tonight, just to make sure I knew what was going on.
We stopped with we watched the last 40 minutes tonight, and I'm glad we turned the subtitles on because it made it a lot easier to understand what was going on.
I think that's something we might need to do for the rest of this genre.
There's a lot of background noise. I don't think audio balancing or anything was really a thing back then. That it got a lot easier to understand what was going on once we turned that on.
Yes, for sure. All right, movie description. Kick us off.
Where do I even start? A private detective gets hired. Bunch of people get murdered. Turns out there's this underlying plot to find some figurine. In the end, they don't even find said figurine, but the private detective is able to put all of the bad guys away, and I guess saves the day in a way. I don't know if he saves the day. He's able to get all the loose ends wrapped up and avenge his partner's murder, I guess.
That's good. That's very good.
Glossed over a lot there.
Yeah. I didn't know how into detail you were going to get, and I was about to be like, just give the general.
I want to rebrand this as like my 20-second summary to try to time box myself, because this one I could have gone for an hour and 40 minutes, and I still don't think I would have uncovered.
Yeah, thank you for not going into that much detail. I think you did it good. All right. So according to the TV, it says a private detective takes on a case that involves him with 3 eccentric criminals, a beautiful liar, and their quest for a priceless statuette. Yeah.
Sure. I think it kind of...
I mean, you thought you glossed over it. This is really glossed over
all the murders. I feel like 3 eccentric criminals implies like the Sticky Bandits or something from Home Alone. Like a bunch of like...
Or like the Three Stooges.
Yeah. Like something like relatively harmless, a bunch of like, antics and shenanigans ensue, but like no, they were guns, they were shooting people.
They weren't very aggressive though. Their fight scenes were, we'll get into it.
Yeah. Was the movie what you expected?
No.
I'm gonna go with an absolutely not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I did give a guess for what I thought it was before we watched it. It was far beyond what I really thought.
I did know that it had a private detective, so I was excited for you.
I mean, I guess my second guess was going to be that she was trying to find some bird, like actual bird, and they hired a private detective. I assume there's going to be some sort of like detective crime thing with all of these movies, but yeah.
I didn't really know anything about it. I mean, it's a film noir movie, so I figured it followed some of the basic parts of film noir, but there was a lot of layers to this one, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. How well did it age?
/ could it be made today? I thought it aged pretty well, to be honest. I think that obviously like we mentioned a second ago, some of the action sequences were a little bit cringy just because they were so slow that like anyone could have wrestled their way out of some of like the, disarming and those kind of things.
Not believable at all.
But otherwise I thought it was pretty great. And I would love to see like a remake, like taking place in that time period. I don't think a remake taking place in the modern day would be as exciting. But taking place in that time period, I think could be really well done.
Yeah, I think it could be done a lot better now. But it was not bad.
Yeah. Did they say that the title of the... Or did you have something else to say?
No.
Did they say the title of the movie in the movie? Yes. Maybe not with the, but probably with the Maltese Falcon. They talked about it a lot.
Yeah, I guess so. I think in my mind, it was more they're talking about like the Falcon or the statuette or...
I think when the I guess they called him the Fat Man was telling the story of the origin of the figurine. I think he called it the Maltese Falcon. So I believe they did say the title of the movie in the movie. Did the title fit the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was it didn't make sense for the first like 20 or so minutes because they don't really mention it for a while until they've like further gone down the case. And I think that I was kind of confused why they were calling it that. For a while. I
mean, I guess, but they also had that thing at the beginning, at the end of the credits before the actual movie started. That was the 1593 or whatever. I mean, so you kind of knew about it.
To come back.
you knew about it and then you forget about it because so much other stuff happens. Then it comes back and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. That's how this started.
It just kind of starts out like a whodunit type thing of like 2 people were murdered. We don't know who it was. And they're like trying to find it out for a while. And you remember, but there's this really like weird pre-scroll thing about the Mayans or someone.
The Malta.
Oh, Malta. Yeah. Someone had this falcon that meant something, that obviously came back to tie it in later. Next question. Were there any actors that went on to do bigger things?
Humphrey Bogart.
Yes, of course.
From what I quickly researched last night, I think this was kind of one of his first bigger roles where he went from being like a side player before to being the main.
Nice use of player there.
I said that just for you. That this was one of his first like main character roles.
Yeah, I definitely have heard the name before. I don't think I've ever seen any movies with him in it before.
Either. I read a lot on his Wikipedia page. He is very interesting.
I'm excited to go down that Wikipedia page. There were at least 2 players from The Stranger on the Third Floor. I guess the actual killer from Stranger on the Third Floor was one of the henchmen in this movie. And
Cairo.
And then the guy who was, I guess, framed
for that.
Or unjustly, I guess, found guilty, and it wasn't actually him, in The Stranger was one of the other henchmen in this as well. So it's kind of interesting seeing them play multiple roles like back to back. I guess these were made about a year apart.
But this is still like early on in the film noir genre that, I mean, they feel like it's back-to-back movies probably in the grand scheme of
probably
things.
did a lot of back-to-back movies. I feel like movies used to be pumped out a lot more then. There wasn't a huge, long editing process, I guess. You just kind of splice some stuff together and you had it there. And I guess it's also not surprising there probably weren't a huge amount of actors, especially in that particular genre, that we might see some more of them as we watch more of these. Be interesting to look out for them.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we already have some crossover that just from actors that I can't wait to see what else comes from this as we keep going deeper into this.
What impact do you think this movie had on pop culture / do you feel cultured after watching it?
Well, from my research, there is debate as to whether this or Stranger on the Third Floor is the first true film noir movie. That I think this also has a lot of those. We'll get to our check boxes of film noir things in a minute, but I think this one kind of kicked off a lot of that. Yeah,
this felt more like one of what I think of as the film noir movies, where there's a lot more like detective work or like private detective especially work in the background, and this definitely, I think, checked a lot more boxes. I guess we'll see in a second.
Yeah, I'm excited to go through those.
Of that, do you have that list?
I do.
Hold up, because we'll go through that before we go through the notes. And do you know if it's me that goes first?
You go first tonight. Okay, so you ready for me to go through my list?
Yep.
Okay, so made in the classic noir period, 1940 to 1958. Check. Black and white. Check. Short and square. Check. It is 101 minutes, but we will give it the 100 minutes or shorter because that's credits and other stuff. Made and set in the U.S. in San Francisco. Crime, murder, guns. Check. Double crosses, flashbacks, and voiceover narration. Not as much voiceover.
Yeah, no voiceover, and I don't think there were any flashbacks.
But this had double crosses, whereas Stranger on the Third Floor did not. Dangerous Babes. Yeah, she was sneaky.
Yeah, I didn't really trust her, and I think it's because you had just read that list before we started.
Yeah,
I wish you hadn't, because I wouldn't have suspected her as much. I would have been.
I wasn't sure of whether or not we should bring this in, but I feel like. I mean, we're watching these movies for a reason that it felt like we needed to know. And then Riding the Rails. Was anybody on a train? There was the boat.
Yeah, I don't think there were any.
There was no train in this one.
Train scenes, no.
From Dusk Till Dawn. Yes, a lot of the movie took place at night. That's 8. And ends on a sour note. This one kind of wrapped up nicely. I was expecting something.
I guess someone on a sour note because he was conflicted of whether he should turn her in or not. I don't know.
Yeah,
if that's
but
a sour note.
I think for me it would have to be like he ran away with her, or he ended up having the real Falcon and was going off to do more like crime things and not just be this perfect man. I don't know. We'll see if we come across another movie that has a true sour ending. But this one gets 8 out of 10 for the film noir score.
A very, very dark gray.
Oh god! Now he's gonna start color coding it. Pull out some like paint samples.
I'll find out the hex code for this.
All right. So lastly, do you feel cultured after watching this?
Yes, I definitely do. Like I said, I feel like this was more of what I expected from the film noir.
Yeah. And again, just to watch movies that were made in this time and to see what the acting was like and the dialogue and how the story was told, I think it's going to be interesting to watch this evolve as we watch other movies over time.
Yeah. And I think when I say like the acting or some of the acting was bad, I don't think it was necessarily the acting so much as it was more of the action sequences, which is hard to do convincingly when you don't have like a bunch of camera angles and CGI and all that other sort of stuff. And this movie wasn't necessarily, about the special effects or anything that I'll forgive that there. I think it was overall very good.
I think in 2023, we go to an action movie and expect to see like true punching, fighting, like it's expected to be so much more intense and believable, and you go for the intensity of it. Whereas I'm sure the fact that they even had guns was shocking enough in the 40s that I think the shock factor is very different now as it was then, and that this was all they needed. It seemed
much more realistic to kids then, or kids with people then. So I guess now we'll move on to notes. My first note was, were there just fewer people needed to make movies in that time period? Because they didn't say the credits were that long. And I don't know if maybe they just didn't credit, every last person of the catering staff then, or they didn't really have best boys. My guess would be more that they just didn't credit a lot of the behind the scenes help.
I believe from my deep dive on the not MPAA rating, scratch that. I believe from my deep dive on opening credits, it wasn't until unions really started forming, I think closer to like the 60s or 70s, where they really started to credit more and more of the cast and crew. And that's why they started moving the credits to the end of the movie. And it was really just the actors to start with.
The players. Yeah. It seemed like it was that plus like the director and like executive producer, people like really, I guess, funded it. It wasn't necessarily, like all of the behind the scenes people that actually like helped make it. So
but I am sure that it is a lot less than it is now of people that were involved in making these. I think there's a lot less intricacies to a movie like this as opposed to Terminator or Indiana Jones or all of those bigger action type movies.
Next note was I got some Janet Snakehole vibes from O'Shaughnessy when she walked in the beginning and she was like really done up over the top. And I'm like, do you really like dress like that to just go see like detective when you think you're like in danger or something? Like, or do you try to wear something a little bit less obnoxious or something? It just seemed like a lot. She didn't have the over the top accent that Janet Snakehole, that being Aubrey Plaza's character in the
Parks and Rec.
Snakehole episode of Parks and Rec, where she's acting like one of these time period actresses. It seemed like it was, I can't believe people would have just dressed like that just to go out on the street.
Yeah, her like furs that was just not even like made into a coat, just like the straight up animal.
And whatever she was doing with her hair, all up the poof.
Yeah, the hair is something I could probably talk about for a long time because I just don't understand it from this time period, but we'll move on.
She also talked about how she waited for 3 days at a market for her sister, and she's probably lying now that we know more about her, but can you imagine going somewhere and waiting for 3 days for someone that you're not sure is ever going to actually show up?
So I also have a note on this. Just the not being how I don't even know how to say it, how not connected they are in the 40s and how much more difficult it is to find anybody. I'm shocked they find any criminal ever. How does anybody find anything? Or if you lose like somebody that wants to disappear, how do you ever find them? I just truly don't know how that happens.
Just say there's someone else and then that's it. You are someone else then. Yeah,
there's no like internet to send an actual picture. You can like send a sketch or you can mail across the country a photo. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. But it's not like you can just go down to Walgreens and get something printed or printing off from your computer. You have to like develop it. And I mean, it's a lot more work to find somebody back then.
But with the waiting for 3 days at a market, like I hate waiting for like, 15 minutes for someone when I know that they're going to be there because they like texted me saying they're like on their way. I can't imagine waiting for 3 days, just sitting there, tapping your foot, being like, yep, maybe they'll show. Maybe they won't.
And she
maybe
can't even she can't even scroll through Insta or
I guess people watching could have been fun. That people were way overdressed and everything.
No Wordle, no nothing to entertain her. She just sat there and waited and did nothing. Different times, man.
I guess people like went insane a lot more then. We already mentioned that we saw some recurring players from Stranger on the Third Floor. I did make a note with the I guess, reward that was offered for finding this Maltese Falcon in the beginning. He offered $5,000, which would be the equivalent of $100,000 today.
Okay.
And later, the fat man offered $250,000, which would be 5.1 million today, just for reference of those numbers.
That's good to know. I had a hard time tracking. They were throwing out lots of numbers and there was lots of back and forth on that. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of when they lost me a little bit as far as following the plot, is when the Falcon comes up and there's the back and forth of, I'll give you this much, but I don't even know who has this. And that was tricky for me. It seemed
like, it felt like at one point the guy pulled the reverse of like the classic, dad joke of a son asking for money, where like the son asks for $50 and the dad goes, $30, what the heck do you need $20 for? Like, type joke, where it seemed like he was asking for $5,000 and he's like talks about $10,000 and immediately throws out $15,000, just kind of talking it up as if he knows that he's got the leverage there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was kind of hard to figure out who was paying what for what and how they knew they could trust them or anything. But I was just trying to make sense of what those amounts really meant. Because I'm like, $5,000 seems like a lot of effort to do what they were doing and put their life on the line and all that. But for $100,000, bit different.
$5.1 million?
5.1 million for 250,000.
That's what I'm saying. That like also a little different.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was interesting how they kept having more midnight coffee. I guess when he got back to his house, his apartment, whatever, was making coffee late at night. And I'm like, what is it with them and drinking coffee so late at night? I mean,
coffee and cigarettes, right?
Yeah, but those would, yeah.
And I guess just something to do. And I mean, I guess it seemed like it was already like almost dawn anyways, just like a power through kind of move in this instance. In Stranger on the Third Floor, they were just drinking coffee to drink coffee at 9 p.m.
The coffee shop was bumping in that movie. I don't know if maybe they didn't understand caffeine then and just they were like liked coffee, or if coffee wasn't as good and strong then because it was just, crap coffee that might have even been ground before or used before, who knows. But just thought that was interesting. Again, we already mentioned the action sequences being a little bit kind of cringy, of like kind of relied on a lot of just
a hope and a prayer that someone's going to believe this.
The best is when Sam comes up and tries to get the guns from the gunman by going up to his like overcoat, pulling it down around his arms so he's like in like a weird like straitjacket thing, then reaching down and pulling his two guns out because his arms are stuck. And it took a lot longer that I feel like he could have definitely escaped that or avoided it or just pulled his like shoulders back up and grabbed his guns. But it seemed like he gave up very early on that.
And even when Cairo was in his office with his little baby gun and he just like walks up and just takes it out of his hand, and I was like, nobody would have that slow of reflexes.
Yeah, he does like a spin move and then grabs it. Like he would have just shot you then if he was going to pull the trigger.
I mean, all of these guys have guns, but I didn't see anybody pull the trigger.
The only ones we saw were in the shot of the partner, I guess, getting killed.
We watched him die, but we didn't even see the person with the gun. So I was just like, I'm having in my 2023 brain having a hard time buying a lot of this because there would have been so much more.
Well, how good were the special effects there, and did they have good, like guns with blanks then?
I mean, I 100% understand why that was not a thing, but it's just like,
and I do wonder if that was an artistic decision here or if they just didn't have the props to do it then.
Yeah.
Later in the movie, I made a note of why did we need the opening scroll, especially if they were going to explain the whole background behind the Falcon later. It seemed like that could have just been skipped.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's a good
some
question.
Weird background. They tell us about it later, but we didn't need to know it before then. It would have been better to just kind of be like, why do they care about this stupid thing? Until the guy explains it, instead of being like, we know why because we saw beyond the fourth wall. We saw the
it'd be one thing if they like dove right into the Falcon and the fighting over it and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, it takes so long to set it up that by then, like we said, we've forgotten about that beginning scroll that it, like you said, it's not necessary.
And then I heard you remark during the movie, but I'd already made this note too about how I got a lot of vibes from Indiana Jones in this. Way less over the top action and sequence, all that. But it felt like this guy was just slightly smarter than the average person and trying to find some like statuette and all of those things.
And you're never really sure who you can trust. Pretty early on, I had some Indiana Jones vibes without the jungle and the
and also being like far too close to the
no
enemies
whips
for comfort. Yeah, where it's like you could get caught at any point, or this guy's could have just shot you at any point. I had a plus next to that. There's a second note I was gonna say about it, but I can't remember what that is now.
We can circle back if you come up with it.
And the last note I had was the technology, where I kept finding myself thinking like someone was going to be like wearing a wire. They're having this conversation because they're going to use this to catch them or turn them in. Obviously, that wasn't a thing back in 1941. Or that someone was going to be like texting someone or, you know, slowly calling in the cavalry in these situations, but you couldn't really do that without going over to the phone and going to the rotary thing and going over 7 different numbers to try to make a phone call real quick or talk to an operator.
The rotary phone killed me. And I'm just like, I remember as a kid, it was like such a point of pride of how quickly I could dial my grandmother's phone number, my best friend's phone number. It was like, oh, I could dial it so fast that to watch, scroll all the way over, wait for it to go all the way back, find the next number, scroll the way. I mean, it was so cringy to watch that.
And I feel like he seemed like he was very slow with it. I feel like I used to play with my grandmother's rotary phone, and we could like dial much faster than that. But also it was hard because I knew he was calling the police in that instance, but it wasn't 911 because I don't think 911
I also
came
paid
around
attention
for
to
a
that
while
too.
after that. That it was just like, oh, you got to dial 7 numbers so painfully slowly to call the police.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I'm glad you were paying attention to that too, because it was driving me nuts. I was like, dial faster.
But that's the last note I have on that, unless I remember what I was also going to say about Indiana Jones.
We'll come back to it. Okay, so my first note actually goes to the opening scroll, and we kind of talked about it while it was happening, but they mention like pirates stole the Maltese Falcon, and we were like, is this like a prequel to Jack Sparrow, and is this all coming back full circle to our theme from season 1?
Are in the same universe.
So I just had to make a quick note of that because we had a good laugh about that. And then after the opening scroll, it was like setting the scene for San Francisco, and they showed the first picture, and I was like, oh, Golden Gate Bridge. Like, let me try and look a little closely at this. And then they were like, Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco, San Francisco. And it was so quick that I was like, was I seeing that right? Are we sure that's San Francisco? Because it was less than a second for each one. It was so
look
quick.
at it and be like, does this look like at all like it does
Exactly.
today?
Yeah, I was like, oh, we were there, not like, a couple of years ago, but like, I'd love to see what it looked like then. And then, all of a sudden we were in his office, and I was like, we could have slowed that down just a little bit for me.
And also the fact that it was in San Francisco, and besides him referencing turn at this next hill or something, I didn't see any, they didn't show too many street shots, but I didn't see any hills around there.
Which is disappointing because that's hands down my favorite part of being in San
That's what I think
Francisco.
about San Francisco. I think it's just constant like cliffs.
Nothing brings me greater joy than driving in San Francisco. I know you hate it. All right. My next note is, so kind of back to your technology and how things are different now, is really thinking about how he was a private detective. And I guess I knew the parody of noir films growing up, but I never really thought about how a private detective would be so much more necessary back in this time. Whereas now we have the internet and you can see what almost anybody's doing or what they've been up to. Obviously people just like can put themselves out there less, but for the most part, everybody's got social media, email.
You can do your own stalking. Just look them up, search all their social media.
I could probably be a
history.
private detective based on how much I grew up in the Facebook stalking, Instagram stalking world, that it was like, oh yeah, like she's looking for somebody. She has no clue of how to find anybody. There's not even Google Maps to look up a street address. Like you have to rely on other people for that.
To find out that address he was sent was a what did he call it? A dull something.
He had some good words for
I feel
that.
like that was a common phrase.
It was hooey, and he said something else. Yeah, that was.
He called the statuette a dingus, which does that mean something behind his eyes? Just like I associate that with it meaning like you're like an idiot, you're a dingus. Does that have some sort of like
Can you deep dive the word dingus for us for next week?
I would love nothing more than a deep dive dingus for next week.
Please. At Wheezy Waiter would really appreciate a deep dive on the word dingus, especially.
Maybe he's been using it wrong.
We'll let him know. And then, this is where my next note of what comes in, because his partner dies and then he's having an affair with his partner's wife. And then everybody starts lying. And it was
a situation where I thought that he was like the main guy was guilty, or
Sam Spade.
Yeah. That I thought that he was the one that did it like early on, just like in Stranger on the Third Floor. I thought, was it Michael? Is that the main character's name? I thought he was the killer in the beginning until later in the movie.
Yeah, I couldn't get a good read on him. I wasn't sure, and it seems like he was kind of, as a private detective, you kind of have to skirt the line of what's good and what's bad to help the people that you're working for, but you're like kind of on the police's side, but not always. And I think the line there is very blurred.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't really thought about. It's kind of like a lawyer
where you hear a lot about crimes, but you're not going to turn all of them in because of like some confidentiality. But I don't think there was a legal barrier for him. It was more just kind of it'd be bad for business if I just went around ratting everyone out.
He said a couple things about that, like that's bad for business. And I mean, it seems like that's a lot more of his motive for his stuff. I also thought the camera angles were a lot more dramatic and noticeable in this. I mean, they might have been last week too, but just in this time period more than anything. I feel like nowadays we try to make the camera a lot more subtle of how we're capturing things, but all of a sudden it would just be this like really like from below shot up in somebody's face, or it was a lot more harsh of a switch from instead of something like a little more gradual. And maybe it's because it's black and white and you can't use lighting and color to your favor, but I felt like the camera angles were a little harsh and aggressive.
Yeah, some of them felt like way too close, but I think in the beginning, at least, some of the shots were intentionally like that, so you couldn't see. But yeah, I agree. I felt very claustrophobic in some of the shots, especially in the beginning.
We talked about how the fight acting was just terrible, and even just like the punches and the slaps and all that stuff. I mean, it was comical for us watching it with our perspective now. I'm not sure how it was perceived in the 40s, but I thought it was funny.
Might have been cutting edge then.
True. Okay, my next note is every time I don't consider myself like a super hardcore feminist. I definitely believe in like women's rights, but I'm not like over the top about it. But every time he called one of these women like precious or angel or darling, it like made my skin crawl and just want to just throw up everywhere. It was made me so uncomfortable that if anybody ever was like, oh, go put on some coffee, precious, I'd be like, you go put on some coffee. Like, do not talk to me like that. Absolutely not. And it made me very uncomfortable.
I mean, I'm just bad with like pet names like that in general, but I can't imagine like calling someone, especially someone not my wife, precious.
Yeah, I mean, he was just throwing it out all over the place. Precious, angel. I wish I'd like made more note of it in the beginning. I started writing it down tonight, and precious and angel were the big ones tonight, but it just made me very uncomfortable. And it's also super interesting just to watch how different men and women are portrayed. And I mean, I'm sure it wasn't portrayed, it was just how it was, but I noticed it more than I thought I was going to, of how much more they kind of demean the women of, oh, like she can't be trusted, or she's a woman.
And he like shook her at one point, like shaking sense into a woman, I feel like was like a thing that men thought they needed to do then. Just seemed very like cringy when I saw that.
Yeah, it all kind of makes me uncomfortable. I don't
that part did not age very well, but also I think was more of a sign of the time. But I agree, it just was kind of hard to watch some spots.
Don't you ever call me precious? Oh God, I can't even say it. That's so weird. Okay, my next note is, I don't know if you noticed, but when he found the newspaper when he was searching the fat man's apartment, and he found the clipping that said like the Hong Kong Paloma boat or whatever.
I don't remember him seeing that.
It was that's how he knew to go look at the boat, as it was in the newspaper. Gotcha. But you could see that it was something that had been cut and pasted onto a full newspaper. So they typed out their script, and I noticed it at the last second, and I almost had to rewind it because I was like, oh, I think that's definitely like pasted on top. And it's just interesting to think, oh, they like didn't make a whole newspaper, whereas nowadays I think they would definitely make a whole newspaper full of fake stuff.
One of my favorite things to do in movies is like pause it when there's showing like a newspaper blurb to like read the rest, because they usually tell me to look at the article or the headline, but I love to see the article, or see like if I can see some of the things along the side of how much effort did they put into this fake news story.
Nowadays I think props departments are like all over like, oh, we are going to make up some good stuff.
No, nowadays it's going to be ChatGPT.
That's true. Before the last like 6 months.
Hence the writer's strike.
True. But I thought it was just really interesting that you could see that they just took a newspaper and they found a place where they could put it and just pasted it right in there. And then we kind of talked about this already, but my last note is subtitles. We started watching this movie with subtitles for the last 30 minutes, and I think we just have to watch them all with subtitles, because it is it's like a little bit their accents and how because the language they use is slightly different from what we use now. We only know of that language in like a parody standpoint, so trying to follow what they're saying, plus the audio quality is not super, that I think we just need it.
Great. Like the scene where they were at the boat and there was a lot of background noise going on. I'm
with
like,
the fire.
If we didn't have the subtitles, I wouldn't even know they were actually meant to be heard. It was so hard to hear.
Yeah, that I think from here on out we are definitely going to need to watch these movies with subtitles, because it made it a lot easier to follow. Because I think even last week, didn't we watch the whole movie with subtitles last week?
I don't think we did.
Okay. I can't remember because I feel like we've watched something recently with subtitles on.
Ted Lasso.
Well, yeah. I feel like it was something else though, but
Yeah.
sometimes I just need it to make sure that I'm following, especially for something like this where I'm trying to understand the plot. And although it does kind of take away with watching like their acting and some of that stuff, I need those subtitles on.
So my Indiana Jones note, I don't remember exactly what it was, but something else I just remembered was, I believe, the Indiana Jones, what's the name of it? What's the sub?
Raiders of the Lost
Raiders of the Lost Ark. I believe Raiders of the Lost Ark took place in this time period that this movie was actually made.
I want to say it was 38.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting to think about. Trying to marry those two up is that movie was a more modern take on that particular time period.
Yeah, and I was also, just as we were talking about this, remembering that like this was filmed and taking place during World War II, and they're making this movie about this bird statue and all of the World War II stuff. I think it was when you were talking about the coffee that was like reused, and I was like, oh, like war rations, and like trying to make sense of all that stuff. But
I wonder, like, really this movie is filmed, made, sent to theaters, and I wonder how many of these movies were then sent overseas to the troops. And I guess if you've only got one movie or two movies, or just a finite number of them, the troops are probably going to watch these once a week during their like movie time that they might have for some sort of downtime. That I can see a lot of these being become really popular because it was the only thing they had, and so they had to watch it
aiding
over and
in their
over again.
popularity. Yeah.
And they come home and they just talk, oh, let's go see that Maltese Falcon movie again, or talk about that.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. And maybe one of my deep dives, since we don't have too many for this week, will just be to look a little bit into like the Hollywood World War II crossover era, and if Hollywood played any part in that. And I don't know, just see what I can find out about that.
Yeah, I am very curious about that.
Fascinating. All right, well, I guess this is a wrap on episode 2 of season 2. And
again, keep the recommendations coming if you guys have any. We are very excited to keep exploring this.
For sure. And if you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or follow or subscribe on wherever you get your podcast. And if you really love the podcast, to rate and review wherever you get your podcast.
Thumbs up the episode on YouTube.
Yeah, all the things. And if you want any more like behind the scenes, we post some reels, and we're going to be getting better about posting more behind the scenes stuff. It's just a lot to keep up with, but we have Instagram and Twitter. Both of them are at Culture Night Pod, and we'll be back next week with another Film Noir TBD.
Can't wait.
Yeah, tune in next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.